You're listening to the University of Liverpool podcast, brought to you by the University of Liverpool online programs. Make a plan to advance your career today. Study a postgraduate degree with a world-class university without leaving your home or full-time job. You don't have to go far to go further.
Welcome to the University of Liverpool podcast. I'm Neil Morrison. Okay, imagine this. You're a loans manager at a local bank, reviewing loan applications that come across your desk. One catches your eye. The amount to be borrowed? £300 million. Or a little over $380 million US. Okay, that's a lot. You're paying attention now. You keep scanning the document. Purpose of the loan, sports stadium. How often will it be used? About 25 days a year. Income of the applicant? Operating loss of well over £100 million in the past 10 years. Okay, that's not great. So what do? Do you sign off on the loan? This is the scenario for Everton FC and its proposed new stadium at Bramley Moor Dock in Liverpool. Now, you may still be on the fence, so you'll want to consider the potential risks. And on the risk line of the application, it turns out that if one or two employees get seriously injured, the business stands to lose about 70% of its income. And here's why.
Well, one of the big risks, Everton are a Premier League football club, and...
This is Kieran Maguire. He's a lecturer in economics, finance, and accounting at the University of Liverpool's Management School. I borrowed the whole bank manager scenario from an article he wrote on football finances.
The vast majority of their income, around about 80% of their income, comes from broadcasting rights. But in the Premier League, you can be relegated to the division below.
This relegation happens to the bottom three teams in the Premier League at the end of each year.
And what will happen then is that the average championship income from TV is 5 million sterling compared to 100 million in the Premier League. So that's a little risk which we need to take into consideration.
Okay, let's just stop there for a second. 100 million in income drops to 5 million if the team is relegated to the league below the Premier League. As any sports fan knows, it only ever takes a couple bad injuries to a couple top players or a series of terrible performances or just bad luck for a team's prospects to change dramatically. It seems incredibly risky.
Yes, it is. What Everton Football Club have in their favour is that they've not been relegated since the Premier League was started in 1992, and before that, Everton were a successful team in the Old English First Division. But then you could perhaps argue that the likes of Aston Villa and Newcastle have also historically been successful teams, and both of those teams were relegated in 2016 to the Championship. Newcastle subsequently have been promoted back up again, but Aston Villa, despite spending huge amounts of money, failed in the Championship and finished mid-table.
So in this scenario, it seems highly unlikely that any loans officer would think, yeah, I'm signing off on that. In the case of Everton, they've managed to do this, and they did it with help from the city.
What the City of Liverpool is proposing to do is to be the guarantor in respect of the loan. It's effectively the same as perhaps when you try to buy your first house and you think you can make the repayments, but the bank's not so convinced about you, and therefore they go to your mum and dad and say, if little Johnny can't repay, we're going to come to you for the money. So the city council is acting as the stand-in should Everton fail to make the repayments.
So in the end, the city of Liverpool is potentially on the hook for hundreds of millions of pounds. And the question is, why? Why would they agree to do this? Well, in the case of Everton, the football club has agreed to pay the city £4 million per year as a sort of fee. That's a nice injection of cash for any local government. And then there's this familiar argument.
The argument that's being put forward by both Everton and the local corporation is that if they build this stadium in a new area of the city, which is going to be set up for development, it will act as sort of the hub, and it will attract lots of retailers, and you get a retail park and you get a few cinemas, and therefore it will generate income for other stores, and the local authorities will start to make money as well because they'll be able to charge local taxes. So they're trying to present it as part of an integrated financial arrangement, which is going to benefit the city of Liverpool.
Now, we're going to get back to this argument about sports facilities providing a boost to the economy in a little bit. But before we do, let's look at the finances of a couple of other clubs for comparison. And the goal here is not to criticize Everton, far from it. As Kieran points out, Everton faces some serious challenges.
I think one of the problems that Everton have is that the facilities that they have to offer, what we refer to here in the UK as the prawn sandwich brigade. It's the corporate football fans. It's the guys that want to go there, entertain a client and so on. Well, Everton Stadium is it's magnificent in the sense of being a piece of architectural history, but it is outdated. So they need to move somewhere new if they're going to attract other forms of income to the club.
The fact is, professional football in the UK is high stakes. It's a world where immense financial risk is the norm, and as a result, teams are constantly on the hunt for new forms of revenue. Attracting the prawn sandwich brigade is just the start. Today, football teams are much more than just competitors on a field. They are enormous international marketing brands. For example, Everton's crosstown rival is Liverpool FC.
Liverpool have historically been more successful than Everton Football Club, and they were most successful in the 1980s. And this started to give them a global footprint in terms of being recognised. And what Liverpool Football Club have done is that they've started to leverage on that, and they've got supporters clubs in many different places around the world, and also from their point of view, it benefits them from being able to sign more lucrative commercial deals. So their commercial income is substantially higher than that of Everton.
Essentially, what Liverpool FC has done, and what Everton is hoping to do, is to keep building the business off the field, increasing the range of revenue streams to try to remove some of the risk.
Football clubs have income from three broad sources. They have match day income. Clubs play so many games at home each season. They've got TV income, and they've got commercial income. And what we've seen with Everton is that they are more dependent upon the broadcasting income than Liverpool. And this does create that risk, especially when they are if they're having a bad season, the risks of relegation are far greater for a side who might be having 80% of its income coming in from a single source. So, in any form of management, if any form of business, you talk about broadening your portfolio, spreading risk. And Everton's risk is very much orientated towards broadcast income, and they're not alone in that. In the Premier League, probably 14 teams out of 20 are very highly dependent upon the TV income.
And TV income in football is incredibly volatile. We've already mentioned the loss of income that comes with relegation, but even at the top of the league, the stakes are exceptionally high.
If you finish in the top four positions in the Premier League, that gives you qualification for the following season into the Champions League. Now, the Champions League is a competition which is played between 32 teams across Europe, and it takes place midweek. And it is very lucrative in terms of a separate broadcasting deal, which you can plug into. Last year, Manchester City, they got the furthest as far as UK clubs were concerned, and they made about 80 million in terms of their romp through the Champions League qualification. They made it as far as the semi-final. They were defeated by the winners Real Madrid. But 80 million sterling, that's over 100 million US, is adds to the armory, which the manager can then use the following season.
The fourth place team makes over £80 million more than the team that came in fifth. That's a staggering amount. It's over 100 million US dollars. So again, one of the ways teams try to buffer themselves against this uncertainty is by growing other sources of revenue. The team that is best at this is Manchester United.
Manchester United are an intriguing company because they were taken over by the Glazer family, who own some American sports franchises around about 11 years ago. And the Glazer family borrowed $1 billion to acquire the club. It was debt-free at the time, so they effectively remortgaged the club. They did a leverage buyout. Over the years, they've slowly managed to get some of that debt down. When they initially were taken over, they were paying a rate of interest of 14.75% a year, which is clearly...
Whoa, my God. Did they take the loan out on a credit card? That's incredible.
Well, it was a very high risk deal. The banks were the banks were really in control. And since then, Manchester United have been fairly successful due to their coach Sir Alex Ferguson. But they were having to pay huge sums of money out in terms of bank interest each year, and eventually that started to catch up with them. So they have they've not won the Premier League for the last 3 or 4 seasons, and this season they finished 5th. But they did manage to qualify for the Champions League through winning Europe's second trophy, which is called the Europa League. So Manchester United are very successful in terms of generating revenue. They generate 25% more revenue than any other football club in the Premier League. They have the highest wage bill. They have the stadium with the highest capacity, and they have the most broad range of commercial partners. If you go to Asia, you will see Manchester United players advertising everything from motorcycles to noodles to snack bars to soft drinks to betting and mobile phone corporations. So they are very, very good at expanding their brand. And they really have sort of set the template that other clubs are now trying to follow.
Many other sporting leagues have some sort of revenue sharing mechanism. NFL football, that bastion of extreme machismo located in the land of no-holds-barred capitalism, has an arrangement that is actually, it's downright socialist. TV revenues are divided up equally between the teams. That's it. The biggest, most successful team gets exactly the same amount as the smallest, least successful team. The NBA has a very complex revenue sharing formula, but essentially it shifts revenue to smaller, poorer teams. In football in the UK, you have the financial fair play rules. Now that sounds like it would involve revenue sharing, but
the financial fair play rules don't actually help to make football more democratic. What they say in the Premier League is that you are allowed to lose a maximum of 105 million over a 3-year period. So it could be argued that whilst this gives an element of financial discipline and perhaps reduces the probability of a club becoming bankrupt, it actually reinforces the status quo, because if you are a top 4 team and you have the benefit of regular qualification for the Champions League, you have at the start of each year an immediate advantage of, let's say, 40 million, which can be spent on players' wages, can be spent on new players. And in addition, because you are in the Champions League, you're therefore able to attract more lucrative, more globally known sponsors compared to the smaller clubs. So what we've seen in the Premier League is that billionaires have come into the game and they have effectively said, we're prepared to underwrite that 105 million worth of losses. And that's happened with Chelsea Football Club in terms of the Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich. Chelsea didn't win anything in terms of league success for 50 years before Roman came in. And more recently, Manchester City, they've been taken over by the Sheikh Mansour of Abu Dhabi, and he's invested amazing sums of money into Manchester City. And it just so happens that Manchester City's shirts are sponsored by Etihad Airways, which is from Abu Dhabi. And Manchester City's stadium is now called the Etihad Stadium. So it would appear that they were paying pretty premium price for the rights to sponsor the stadium name and to sponsor the shirts. And clearly, if this money then goes into the football club, it can be used as a means of buffeting against financial fair play, which will allow City to compete with the other clubs and to buy more players and to spend more money on wages.
Well, right, because what it is, or what it could be, is essentially a transfer of money from one company to the other that's dressed up to look like, wow, we got a really good deal here on stadium naming rights.
That's right. The owners of the club, they are now capped as to the amount that they can invest in the club each year. So if they can invest in the club through an alternative vehicle, so if you take a look at Paris Saint-Germain, they are sponsored by the Qatari Investment Authority, and that's right, their shirts are sponsored by Qatar Airways, and they are owned by the Qatari Investment Bank. So you are finding clubs, for every rule, there's a smart accountant who can work a way around a rule.
I can understand why it would be of interest for a billionaire with a lot of money to spend, why it might be interested for them to get involved in such a risky business, especially if they're able to sort of take hold of a club and move it into that top four category. What I'm wondering is, does it make sense for cities to support football teams financially, or is it all too risky a venture for public funding?
There is certainly an element of risk, I think, to the City Corporation of Liverpool from doing that. I think they will have assessed the risk. I believe that they asked a firm of professional advisors to go through the books and the projections and the forecasts and budgets. And the view was that Everton was a low risk investment. I am always slightly skeptical about using advisors in this nature, because if you take a look at every World Cup final and every Olympic Games, the cities applying to run those tournaments, they've always employed advisors, and the advisors come up with some fantastic projections and say that it's going to run at a profit and it's going to have amazing legacy benefits, and inevitably every single tournament ends up running at a loss, and 4 years later you're trying to work out what to do with this stadium which holds 80 to 100,000 people. Certainly if you take a look at what's happened in Brazil in 2014 and 2016, South Africa in 2010 in terms of running the World Cup, and here in the UK we had the London Olympics in 2012, which was a fantastic event. And I attended some of those sports myself, things which I'd never seen before and probably never see again. I had an absolutely wonderful time, but what's happened with the London Stadium was that it cost around about 500 or 600 million to construct, and now it's being rented out to a football club who pay 1.5 million in rent in the year. So the numbers simply just don't stack up in the post-tournament era. I'm just a little bit cautious about looking at some of the projections put forward by these advisors. I do think, however, Everton is in a different case because they do have an army of fans who will turn up every 2 weeks, and they are in a city which is starting to grow and thrive once more. But the element of risk, I suspect, is probably downplayed by the documentation which is being produced by both the city and their advisors.
Yeah. I mean, really, when it comes to any one of these sporting events, it's really, we can pretend it's a conversation about finances, but that's really not what is being supported. That's not what it's about. Ultimately, it's the heart tends to win over the head.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you take a look at the big world global events which have taken place, I think the best way to look at it is a 3 or 4 week party followed by a 10 to 20 year financial headache, and that's the same as all good parties. If you don't have a hangover after a party, then you shouldn't have been at the party in the first place.
Kieran Maguire, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Kieran Maguire is a lecturer in economics, finance, and accounting at the University of Liverpool's Management School. And that's it for the University of Liverpool podcast. Please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. And now, I've been hearing some feedback from people who have tried to give us a rating, but aren't able to do it using the Apple Podcast app. And it turns out the only way to do this is through the iTunes Store. So I will include a link to our program in the iTunes Store in the show notes for this episode. So you'll just have to cut and paste the link into your browser, and it will take you to the show page in the iTunes Store. I know that's an extra step. I'm really sorry about that. I wish there was an easier way. It is really helpful, though. It makes it easier for others to find us. You can also share the podcast. That's also very helpful and probably a bit more straightforward. We will also have a link to the University of Liverpool's online MBA program. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks. I'm Neil Morrison.
You're listening to the University of Liverpool podcast, brought to you by the University of Liverpool online programs. Make a plan to advance your career today. Study a postgraduate degree with a world-class university without leaving your home or full-time job. You don't have to go far to go further.